When?
Hello and welcome to lesson number 2. Hope you had an opportunity to take lesson number 1 and chance to take the quiz. This lesson is going to cover scales, triads, and 5-finger patterns and how these things are related. But before we dig too deep into the technical aspects of that, I'd like to show you what the end product is going to look like. I'm going to play a little bit of Louie, Louie for you. So you can probably see that I'm using 3 notes at a time. We call this arrangement a triad. Here's another song that uses triads. This is Halen Jump. Okay, so you can probably see that this triad thing is going to be important. But how do we know which 3 notes to put in the triad? So that's where we're going to have to know a thing or two about scales and 5-finger patterns. So let's start with scales. The scale that I'm going to show you first is called the half-step scale. Scales are nothing more than patterns of repeating notes. The half-step scale is the scale that uses every single note. Okay, so that's not a scale that we're going to use too often, and certainly there's no song I can think of that uses every note of the piano, and for that matter it's even difficult to think of a song that uses an entire repetition of the half-step scale. But I think once you see the whole step scale, and we'll go into some of the more commonly used scales after that, then it'll start making sense. Okay, so let's talk about the whole step scale. So 1 whole step equals 2 half steps. So in other words, from A to B is a whole step because we've got A to A sharp, half step, plus this half step, A sharp to B. So A to B is equivalent to the distance of 2 half steps or 1 whole step. So let's play a sequence of whole steps now and see what that sounds like. Sounds pretty creepy, huh? So this is a scale you might have heard in jazz music or possibly the Star Wars soundtrack, but not something that's extremely common. Now let's look at something that is extremely common. This is the C major scale. And the C major scale starts with C and takes us up to the next C, and it uses every white key and no black keys. So we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and we're now ending on C here. So basically we've got 7 unique notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now I'm going to introduce something called the 5-finger pattern. This is called the C major 5-finger pattern, and what we're going to do is we're going to take 1 finger, okay, 1 finger on each of the white keys, C, D, E, F, G. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the left hand, C, D, E, F, G. So this is an ideal arrangement for playing things like triads, and certainly it makes playing a song written for the C scale much easier. As you can see, I can reach A and B easily, and this is a pretty comfortable position, a good starting point. Within that 5-finger pattern, I can take the first, middle, and last notes together to form the C major triad. Same thing with the left hand. Pretty easy. So, in terms of the scale, we'd be talking about the first, third, and fifth notes. In terms of our 5-finger pattern, it's just first, middle, and last, like most people's names. Okay. So now let's take a closer look at that C major scale once again. I want you to notice that we have whole steps and half steps here. So this first one from C to D is actually a whole step. Now notice E to F, on the other hand, is not a whole step. So we've got 2 whole steps, 1 half step, and we've got 1, 2, 3 more whole steps, and 1 more half step. So 2 whole steps, 1 half step, 3 whole steps, 1 half step. And the reason this is so important is because we're going to use that same rule to form every single major scale. On that note, you're probably wondering, wow, that's going to be a lot of work. I don't know, maybe I should throw in the towel on this piano thing. I've got some really good news, and the good news is there are many scale books out there, inexpensive. There's also something known as the circle of fifths, which makes it very easy to identify the black notes of any major scale, so you can kind of check your work. So don't feel too discouraged by that. Also, in terms of the fingering of these scales, I don't want to get too hung up on that today, simply for the reason that we're more interested in what the relationships between scales, 5-finger patterns, and triads are at this point. In the next lesson, we'll discuss fingering a little bit further. It is important. I would strongly encourage you to study the correct fingerings of these scales, but for today, it's just a little bit too much information for one video. Okay, so now let's take that same rule, the 2 holes, 1 half, 3 holes, 1 half rule, and let's form the G major scale now. Okay, there's your 2 holes, half from B to C, C to D is your whole, D, E, E, F sharp. So that's the 3rd whole step, right? 1, 2, 3, that's the final half step. Okay, so when we play the G major scale, we use white keys with the exception of F, which we always play the F sharp instead of the F when we're playing the G major scale. And you probably see that the G major triad falls on whites, just like the C major triad. So we can actually think of the G major triad as one that fits into the C major scale. The same is also true of the F major triad, because when we start to put together a 5-finger pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, we can see that the first, middle, and last are going to fall on white keys once again. Now this is where it does get a little tricky, because when we go back and look at the other triads, they're not going to fall on white keys. The other major triads are not going to fall on white keys. In fact, I'll show you what happens when I try to play triads going up the major scale in that same fashion. Okay, so some of these have very different tonalities, don't they? Like this one here, the D, the E, and the A have kind of a sour, kind of a sad, dark sound. And when we play them on all whites, we are in fact making minor triads, not major triads. So they're still useful in music, but they're not exactly what we were after as far as trying to find major triads. So let's apply the rule to find the major triad for D. We'll do whole step, half step, whole, whole, right? D to E, E to F sharp to G, G to A. So what we have is white, black, white. The major triad for D in root position. Okay, so now you probably noticed that that doesn't look too much different than the D minor triad. And yes, there is a very simple rule for finding major triads from minor and vice versa. So what you do is you take your major triad, like your C major triad, and you lower the middle note a half step to go minor. Now if you have your minor triad, like D minor, you raise the middle note a half step to go major. And that's true of all the triads in root position. So if you go through the math of each of these, what you'll find is the C, F, and G are whites, as I mentioned before. The D, the E, and the A major triads, all of those triads fall on white, black, white. White, black, white, white, black, white, white, black, white. Okay, and the B one is pretty weird. We'll get to that later. Remember it had that strange tonality. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to show you how easy it is to do the D flat major, because I know right now you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I got to do all this math with these black keys and I'm probably going to screw it up. Guess what? If you take the D major triad and flip it inside out, in other words, you've got white, black, white right now, and we're going to go to black, white, black, and lower every note a half step. So that looks just like an inside out D major. D major, D flat major. Cool, huh? Same thing with E major. Take that E major, that's white, black, white, flip it inside out to black, white, black, lowering each note a half step. There's your E flat major. A major, A flat major. Okay? G major, all whites, flip it inside out, you've got black, 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 G flat major. Cool. Okay, so now B major, whole step, half step, whole step. So when we do first, middle, last, we've got white, black, black. It's the only triad that looks like that. Okay, so now flip that guy inside out by lowering each note a half step, and got black, white, white. If we wanted to make that a minor, of course we would lower that middle note. And at this point, I think that we've talked about how to do every major triad and minor triad in root position on the piano. Not bad, huh? So let's go back to our Louie Louie song a minute. Take another look at that. So this is your A major triad, white, black, white. We play that three times to be exact. And I think this one's 2 times, the D major triad. And then we've got E minor triad, all whites. So I strongly encourage you to try that at home. Maybe play along to the song even. Now let's go back and look at the Van Halen song. And don't worry too much about the left hand at this point. Just let's take a look at the right. Okay, so that first triad, that's a G major triad. What in the world is this thing? Okay, that doesn't look like anything we've discussed today. G, C, E. But that does sound vaguely familiar, because remember our C triad, C, E, G. So now we've got the same letters in a different order, G, C, E. We call that an inversion. And we're going to talk a lot more about inversions next time. But I think for now I've given you plenty to think about. Hope you enjoyed, and look forward to our next video together.